Welcome to the Sherry Andrea Psychic Empath Show with your host, Sherry Andrea. Sherry Andrea brings her listeners interesting discussions and topics related to empathy, psychic and spiritual development, as well as energy work. She is herself a psychic empath, healer, coach, author, and founder of SherryAndrea.com. Welcome, and here is your host, Sherry Andrea.
Hi, this is Sherry Andrea, and thank you for joining me, or rather for listening. I know I start off saying that every time, as though I can't get used to the fact that I'm recording instead of speaking live, but summer's almost over. School is back in session. I think it's August 22nd. I think. Well, anyway, Meet the Teacher is coming up soon. So, right around the corner is time when I will get to see who the teacher is this year. Some of my friends know some of the issues I had last year with my son's school. And for those of you who don't know, who haven't read it in one of my posts, I am not exactly pro-public education. However, for any of you who also feel the same way, you probably also kind of feel like you may not be pro-public education, but at the same time, you're trying to do whatever you can to make it what it needs to be for your child. And so it's a struggle. And it's especially, a struggle if you're someone who is on a spiritual path, you've gone through an awakening, you've started to realize certain truths, and you realize what education should really be. And you begin to see some of the things that are done in the educational system that maybe shouldn't be done, and then you see where it's lacking. Like, for example, and we're just talking right now about this country. We're just talking about the U.S. And I guess, to be fair, I can only speak about the U.S., so I can't really compare it. I can only compare it by what people who have been educated in other countries have told me. And I know that I've known some people whose kids went through preschool and, maybe for, kindergarten, first grade in another country. I knew a woman whose kids did that in, I think it was Brazil. It was either Brazil or Argentina, but I'm pretty sure it was Brazil. And she was telling me, how great the education system is there. And she herself had actually went back home to go to college and get her degree there, and then, came back to the United States. That kind of speaks for itself. It's kind of like she didn't have to convince me that the education system must be good. For goodness sakes, if you actually take your whole family and move them back to your home, another country, for a period of time so that you can get educated there, that, of course, speaks tons, because no one's going to go to that length for just mediocre education. So I can only speak about education in other countries based on what I've been told by other people, also based on some of the things I've seen. As some of you may know, if you've read some of the posts on my blog, or if you've been to the forum, which you can get to, by the way, from my website. On the forum, I put something in the forum related to what's called quantum reading. Because, see, a couple of years ago, when I was I was doing spiritual work, but that was my focus. That was my focus. The only time I used abilities during that time, and for a long time actually, probably for a good year, was in communicating with my own higher self to get truth and understanding, to get clarity on maybe things I was reading, reading or studying. So I was spending a lot of time during the day, just all throughout the day, praying. And so, like when I was at home, I would pray out loud. When I was out and about, I would still be praying, but I'd be praying to myself in my head. I still do that periodically. I try to do it as much as I did at that time. I must admit that really is something, it's like a habit you have to train yourself to. But, it can get to the point where you can't stop. Like, I would try to go to sleep, and when, I was ready to go to sleep, so I would stop doing it. But I found that my mind wouldn't stop doing it. So it would actually take me a little while, and much different than trying to calm your mind, this much different. It was that my mind wanted to continue on that repetitious praying that I had been doing all day and, all week. And so when it was time to go to sleep, I would go to sleep and it was like this, it was like a recording would then kick in, like it would go on autopilot. But anyway, what I was getting at, sorry to get off track, was that I had put information there about quantum reading, and a couple years before that, or a year and a half before that, I had actually gotten information after I had meditated where the concept and the idea came to me about reading a book without actually reading a book, without actually reading the words. And it kind of also, it tied in, the way the concept was given to me, it was given to me also by way of reminding me of the concept of speed reading and what speed reading is based upon. And that in speed reading, you're not reading every word. It's like a scanning. And then the way speed reading works is that literally, if words are flashing on a screen, even if they're flashing so fast that you think you can't read them, if you're looking at the screen as they're flashing on the screen, this is very much subliminal. Your eyes are still picking it up, and so it's like the eyes are picking it up, and it's still transmitting that information, to the brain, so that info is still getting in there. Well, I was given to it. I was reminded of it, and to think of it in sort of the same way. And back during that time when I had gotten this concept, this idea, this was like at the beginning when, I was new to the way I was getting information. So I was very much new to the way I was getting information, and so I hadn't reached my point yet where I was confident in what I was getting, where I very much was having a hard time telling, is this some random thought that I just came up with, just like me off the top of my head, or is this really something that's being given to me? And really I hadn't developed that trust yet, to be able to say, no, I don't have to question, whether or not my mind's just bored and just coming up with things. So the concept, I didn't just get it like one time and that was it. The concept, it kept coming to me. And so for a while, I kept thinking about it. I kept, pondering it, meditating on it. But still, my trust wasn't quite there yet for attaining information in that way or an understanding of it in that way. So I let it go, and then about like year and a half after that, 2 years, I don't know how long it was, lo and behold, I go to the Cryon.com site, and he has a section for free audios that you can listen to. In case you don't want to read, because the channelings are very long. So in case you don't want to read, you could actually go and listen to them. And so I was there, and I ended up on this page by accident, another page that had just a few audios and videos. And there it was. It said quantum reading. And I knew even before I clicked on the link to look at, I knew what it was. I knew. And in that instant, I knew that the information that I had received, in fact, was valid, was from my higher self. And that was just further validation. And then when I looked at it, I was just amazed. And I believe it was taking place in Japan, where there was a class where the children never read the books. They would start their day off by sitting in a circle, and these were young children, I want to say maybe, first graders. They would start off by sitting in a circle and you could say meditating, but a little bit of breathe in, breathe out, quiet time. We're kind of talking the Silva method, if any of you are familiar with the Silva method. So that's how they started off their day. And then this video showed, I don't know if you could say what the kids were being taught. In a situation like that, it's kind of like you're not really sure who the teacher is, if there's any really specific teacher. Of course, they had a teacher. However, in a case like that, where most people would consider something like that very much experimental, so, of course, the teacher who's teaching this class, I think that she had been trained to do it by someone, so it's not like, someone who, okay, I know everything, I know how to do this, I know the ABCs, and so I can teach this to you. No, this was very much okay, everybody pick a book, and these books were not all at their grade level, and some were, and they would have them feel the book, fan the pages of the book, back and forth, and they would do it literally back and forth. They wouldn't fan it just one time, but they would literally fan it back and forth, a variety number of times. They would sometimes fan it close to their face so that the pages would lightly, almost brush their cheek. Some would fan it up by their ear. Some would actually, put the book on top of their head, right up against their head, right up against their ear. Different ways. They were just basically, you could look and see that the point was that they were, in doing that, not only trying to gain the information that the book had, but the unique thing is, for those of you who are empaths, think about it. As an empath, often you feel cursed. You're constantly connecting to other people, of course not meaning to, and other people are connecting to you, and then you're trying to figure out how to break these connections because they're affecting you. But it's like, wait a minute. Here is a case of what an empath actually does being used to gain knowledge. Because think about it, when you're an empath and you have a connection to someone, you are feeling them. You could say, in feeling them and in sensing what they're feeling and picking up their emotions, you could say in that way that you're reading them. You're gaining information about them, what they're going through. Now, even though you don't mean to connect to them and it's happening by accident, maybe, it's a friend, that's going through a hard time. And, I mean, if you're an empath, I mean, you understand that. You often, like I often will get a connection to my parents. I'll get a connection to a neighbor that is also a friend who, you know, when she's going through a hard time, often I get a connection to her. And I generally know that when I get a connection to somebody, it's because that connection was needed for some reason. There was something that person at the time energetically was lacking, and their energy field tried to go out and tried to seek a solution, tried to go out and connect to someone where where that person's energy field could possibly get a little bit of what it needed to be more whole. This is very common if you've read anything about people who are healers, and they often go into nursing homes, and somebody is not that far away from death. At that time, a person's energy level will be very low. And so when they try to give that person healing, in effect, what they're doing is if you can liken it to a vase that only has a little bit of liquid in it, and you give it healing, and the vase fills back up. But unfortunately, because they're so near to death, the thing that happens before death is that the energy level drops, it lowers, and that's a part of the process, a natural process. However, I know you're like, well, then why would the healer do it? It's because when you give healing to someone who is in that situation, it helps with to give them a I guess the right way to say it is it helps to give them a smoother transition. So a healer that does this, I did read, and I can't remember if it was a book I read or somebody's blog, but I did read about someone who wrote about their experience, and very much they worked. One of the places they went was a nursing home, and they often found themselves in this situation, and they wrote about one particular experience where the person that they were healing, the pull was so strong that on the way home, I think they got a ride home, which was fortunate, because they left there feeling almost completely drained of energy, and it did take. The person wrote that it did take them a while to recuperate from the experience. But I mean, that is not everybody is a healer. Everybody has that in them to do something like that and to make such a huge sacrifice. But not everyone is experienced, to the point where they can do it and they can actually go to that extreme of giving of themselves and then recuperate from it. And yes, it's true. I mean, I won't go into it doesn't have to happen that you end up getting drained in that situation. But healers are just like people on a spiritual path. As healers, we're all at different levels. And so some haven't gotten to that point where maybe they have learned how to, bring energy into them in a way where they're not like using the energy that they need. But that's just a matter of educating yourself and developing the skill for yourself. That's not something that just, happens. No, this is something that you have to learn. This is something you have to take upon yourself to protect yourself and to be able to help your own self. But anyway, I got off topic again. So like I was saying, if you're an empath, you have to keep in mind this whole quantum reading thing should ring a bell. The light bulb should go off, and you should have a really huge aha moment, because you should see a distinct similarity between what happens in the empath experience and what happens with these kids when it comes to quantum reading. What are they basically doing as they're touching these books? They're fanning the pages. Well, the result says it all, what's happening. When the kids were interviewed, the kids explained that, and they did. The kids did it to the books and then told the person what the book was about. And they could do that. They could tell them what the book was about. They could tell them about characters that were in the book. They could tell them even to the depth of, in the book, what kind of clothes the characters were wearing, the characteristics, of the character, their personalities. I mean, they could tell them about things that either happen in the books or objects that were talked about in the book. And then when they got into the part of the interview where they were asking the kids to kind of explain a little bit more about, the method and what's happening when they're doing all this, touching the book, scanning the pages, putting them up to their face, listening to the book. Well, what they explained was quite amazing. And it told that they're not just connecting with this book and getting information from this book. No, they're connecting even on a deeper level. So it wasn't just the book itself, which holds the energy. Okay, somebody created the book. And as I've said before, we are all creators, like him, made in the image of him, like him. We are all creators. Whenever we make something, even if it's cooked dinner, you are putting your energy and your vibrations into that. So when I make wire sculpture, I do wire sculptures that hang on the wall. I know that I am putting my vibrations and my energy into that. It's my creation. I have made pieces, different art pieces for people where, I just finished making it. I made it specifically for them. Maybe based on, one piece I made was based on a certain rock band. And I think it was heavy metal. And I don't really get into heavy metal. I never heard of the band before, but I listened to a particular video where they wanted me to see, there was something in the video that they wanted me to incorporate into the art. And so even though I didn't design and make this art piece for me, I made it for someone else. About, I think, 2 days after it was complete, when it was time for me to ship it off, I literally kind of felt like, it was my baby, like I was letting go of my baby. And, every piece I've ever made, when it's time to ship it off, or I go meet the person and I hand it over to them, I feel like I'm giving a part of myself. So you have to understand that someone wrote those books. Their vibrations and energy went into it. The vibrations and the energy and everything they were thinking, and at the time they wrote it, went into it. You could even say their vibratory signature is in that book, so that when the kids were connecting, they were not just connecting to the book, they were also connecting to the author as well. They were connecting to the characters. Yes, it's true, the characters weren't real, but they're real in the author's mind, and so they could, on a certain level, you can think they can connect to them. So, like I said, this should give you this should be a light bulb going on in the aha moment, because, when you think about it, this is like, wow. I can remember when I was in high school, and I'm sure this is for everybody when they're in high school, at some point somebody says that joke about, I wish I could just sleep with the book and, wake up and I knew everything. where I had to read that long chapter. I wish I could just put the book under my pillow, and that would do it. And literally, that kind of makes that scenario kind of almost like a reality, because that's in fact what we're talking about. We're talking about connecting to information and the understanding of it on a different level and on an energetic level. So I know I got on this subject because I was talking about, it almost being time for my son to go back to school. So, but and surprisingly, this was not the topic of this discussion that I had planned. Now, let me see if I can even remember what the topic of discussion was tonight. Oh, okay, I do remember. And it's probably good that I talked about that first, because this it wouldn't have been a very long time. I mean, what I had to talk to you about probably would have only taken 15, 20 minutes, so you got a little something extra. So now you can go to the Kryon.com. It's spelled Kryon.com. And then there are some links that you'll see on there for, I think the link says free videos, or it may say free audios. But on the site, it's called Quantum Reading, or you can just Google Kryon.com and Quantum Reading, and there's a really nice video of, the whole thing, showing the kids in the classroom and everything that they did, and I think you'll find it really interesting. So the topic for tonight is actually the 3 selves, and the reason why I wanted to talk about the 3 selves is because I can remember a time when I really didn't understand the 3 selves. No matter what I read, I didn't really get it. And today I was thinking about it, and I realized, you know what? I read so much about it, and I didn't get it. And there's no way I would have ever gotten it until I actually experienced it for myself. So I know you're probably like, well, why are you telling us if we're not going to get it? Because maybe there's a chance that, you're listening and you're ready for this information, or you're listening and this is something that you've actually been wanting to know more about, and you're ready for it. So the thing is, we've all heard of the 3 selves, and in the beginning, I really thought that the 3 selves had something to do with, the inner child, and then myself, and then who else I didn't know. And that was the gist of my understanding for a while. But I'm going to do you a favor and cut to the chase, and understanding that I would say it probably took me about a year to get to the point where, I'd come full circle from the point where I was like, I don't understand it, and I just feel like I have to understand this. I have to know what this is all about, to the point where I'd come full circle, and it was like, now I finally have, I totally have the understanding. I totally get it now. But basically, the 3 selves are the 4 parts of the lesser self, which is the human self, the higher self, which is also referred to as higher self, beloved Christ self, and then there is the I am present, the 3 selves. Now, the hard thing about this is what makes learning and understanding about the 3 selves difficult, is that it is very hard to think of them all as you, because they are in fact you. Every time you talk to yourself, you're not really talking to yourself, you're talking to your higher self. Whether you realize it or not, your higher self's always been listening. That's like the higher self is your true self. But the higher self is also the self that you can actually realize while living in human form. The higher self can be realized. And then, of course, you have the I am presence, which is referred to as your God self. So you have the human aspect of yourself, the lesser self, the self that contains the negative ego. And yeah, I've been told not to call it that. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why. I mean, part of the reason why I call it the negative ego is because I took psychology in college, and also at some point along this journey, as I was studying and learning about the ego, something that we receive when we incarnate. We don't have it always. We don't have it on the other side. When we are existing as our true selves, just a spirit, just light, just energy, we don't have the ego. Of course not. However, this is something that when we incarnate, that we receive. So, at some point along my spiritual journey, I decided that I had to understand the ego. Because everyone was always talking about the ego, and often they would say, "Oh, well, that's just the ego. That's just the ego," and I had to understand it because at first, I always, read all these discussions, people discussing, well, is the ego something you get rid of? Is it something you don't get rid of? And so I just had to understand it for myself. Well, where do I get my knowledge from? I'm a type of person that I will often go back to basics, because I do feel that by going back to basics, you can't go wrong. So I did that. I went to a lot of psychology websites, and I restudied what I had learned in college about the ego and the different parts of the ego. The id and the, whatever, and the, so that's why I call it the negative ego, is because you have ego, but it's not just, you don't want to think of it as just one thing. It's not. There is the negative ego, so you could actually kind of think that you've got two sides. It's like, literally, it's like the good aspect of yourself and the negative aspect of yourself. Some people call it our shadow self. Well, you can actually understand why some people call it that, is because there is balance in everything, as I've said before. Up for up, there's down. For left, there's right. Literally everything is balanced. Just like we're all balanced, and God is balanced, because God isn't male and He's not female. He's perfectly balanced. There's the divine feminine aspect of God and divine masculine aspect of God, and there is that perfect balance, and that is actually what the story of Adam and Eve was trying to show when it came to the whole, take a rib from Adam. It was a mistranslation and didn't actually say rib. It was a mistranslation, not because they did it on purpose, but because when translating from Aramaic to Greek, and then I think it went from Greek to English, there were certain letters that existed in the English language that didn't exist in those two languages. So translating some words were almost impossible. So if you go back and do a little research, then you will find that there was a mistranslation, and it's not rib, it's actually side, meaning to divide in half. So you see that even in the story of Adam and Eve, they spoke of that divine balance, that divine aspect of divine feminine and divine masculine, that perfect balance. And so, too, with the ego, why would we think that the ego wouldn't also be that? We've all seen a show or a sitcom where they portray the person being swayed by their consciousness, and on one shoulder there's a miniature version of them that's like dressed up like the devil, and then on the other shoulder there's a miniature version of them that's like dressed like an angel. And the devil is trying to convince them, to do bad stuff, and the angel is like going, don't do it, don't listen to him. And there's that constant fight and constant battle going on. Well, that picture of that is actually quite accurate as to what is going on. So don't fault me if I call it if I choose to call it the negative ego. I mean, after all, they're just words, and they're just human words at that we created. Man created the words. God didn't. They're just words. And you can tell that I'm saying that for a reason, because I've been scolded a time or two for calling it the negative ego, believe it or not. Believe it or not, some people, they actually take the time to worry about stuff like that. But anyway, so you could think of it as a negative ego and a positive ego. So you're not trying to get rid of ego altogether. You're not even trying to get rid of the negative ego. The only thing you are trying to do is gain self-mastery. That's it. Self-mastery. That is one of the biggest keys to achieving enlightenment, is self-mastery, self-control, which for most of us is pretty difficult. For most of us, if somebody starts screaming at us, we can't hold ourselves back and we have to react. For some of us, if we feel like somebody's done something and it's a great travesty or great injustice, we feel justified. We feel like, we have to do something. We have to take care of this. It wouldn't be right if we didn't. That's because we don't have control. If we had control, then we would be more in acceptance of every moment and the way things are at every moment. And in every moment, we would have acceptance that at every moment, everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. And that nothing happens by accident. And that if something happened, there's a reason for it, even if we can't see it. Now, some of you would probably say to me that you don't get, that you just can't wrap your mind around. But think about it. If you're Christian, Baptist, Protestant, you've actually probably heard too many times to count, his ways are not our ways. And that is exactly what that means, to be an acceptance of the way things are without understanding why it has to be that way, why this or that happened, but to be an acceptance that whatever's going on at any given moment is exactly what's supposed to be going on. So it's all about self-mastery and gaining control of the self. So you think about it, and do you have control over the little guy or little girl that's sitting on your shoulder that's dressed up like the devil? Or is he just doing whatever and running rampant? Does he have your ear 100% of the time? Which one really has your ear? Can you actually not listen to the little negative ego guy? Do you have the ability to actually hear, have him poking you and going, say this, say that, react to like this. No, you want to get mad about that. Oh, how dare they talk to you like that? Oh, you're going to take that? Can you actually ignore all those things your negative ego is saying to you? Listen, the fact of the matter is, controlling your negative ego isn't difficult. It is, you look in a mirror, and that little voice that says, I look so huge today. I just look like I gained 50 pounds since yesterday. That little voice that you hear that's telling you that, making you look in the mirror and think that way, that's your negative ego talking to you. Can you not listen? I mean, can you literally tell your negative ego to shut up? You know, what they have to say is not needed, that you don't need to hear what they say, and to just sit there and be quiet. Can you have your negative ego still there and make him just sit on your shoulder and not be allowed to interject, not be allowed to sway you? This is about, control of the self. And unfortunately, this is one of the things that if you're on a spiritual path, that you have to start working on. You need to start working on it early on. Now, I'm not saying you have to work on it early on and have it resolved and have gained, self-mastery over the ego early on. I'm just saying that since it is such an uphill battle, this is usually something that most work on the whole time they're on. They're consciously on a spiritual path, and they're consciously working on it. And what I mean by that is, for example, while I was consciously working on it, that meant that I was literally, any thought I had, anything that I sensed, okay, I'm getting ready to open my mouth to say something, I was, what's the right word for it? I was being like the watcher over my own self, almost like saying, I'm supervising this. No, tell me first, what are you getting ready to say? And let me look at it. Let me see if it's okay. Let me see where it's coming from. Is it is it coming from my negative ego or not? So I would literally take the time to do that. I mean, a lot of people didn't know that. They couldn't tell that by the way I was, communicating with them. They couldn't tell, but I very much was. There were some times when, people were like really mad at me for something and would be yelling and screaming at me and kind of at the same time looking at me like, why aren't you saying anything? And it's difficult. Believe me, it's very difficult because we spent most of our lives reacting freely. And so it really does feel very foreign to hold back that reaction, that the negative ego is trying to cause. And so often it takes a lot out of you. It's a very emotional thing to seriously and consciously work on your negative ego. Some people, I do believe there's different levels of where people are at even when they start working on it. Some people, it comes more naturally to them. They don't really have to try so hard to work on it, and because some people are just calm, non-reactive people to begin with. So there are some people that they kind of have a head start on it, but then there are more people like me though. Probably 75% of the population is more like me. Literally, having to tape my mouth shut to not react. That was me. Not being able to just sit, listen, be non-reactive, and not have, at the same time, not have negative thoughts. I mean, because sometimes you can be non-reactive, but you're still thinking what you're not saying. Well, that doesn't count. No. To have self-control means that it's not just that you're controlling what's coming out of your mouth, it means control of your actions, thoughts, and deeds, everything. So sometimes you may not be a person that verbalizes it, that verbalizes when you get frustrated, when you get angry. You may not even verbalize when you're worried about something. You may be a person that very much, you don't voice it. You keep it on the inside. You try to make it seem like nothing is wrong, even though people can still tell. That's not good. Most of the time, people like that I have known, I think almost every person that I've ever known that has suffered from cancer has been a person that internalizes their emotions, meaning they're not voicing it. They're used to, I wouldn't really use the phrase bottling it up inside. I wouldn't really use that phrase, but I'm just saying they're not the type of people to go and dump what's wrong on another person verbally. So they're thinking about it, even though they're not voicing it. They're trying to work it out in their head, but they're very much keeping it on the inside. Well, just because you're not acting worried or voicing anything that says you're worried, if you're still worried, that means you're expressing the emotion of worry, and that's still going to affect you. And that is still something that you have to get control of. So, often what happens, for example, is that when somebody is worried about something, it's the whole prayer thing. There are many people that when they have something going on or they need help with something, they will pray. And they may pray every night. And they will pray faithfully about it, pray faithfully for an answer, for a solution, and for help. But what happens is, help could come with that first prayer, except that they stay in a state of worry. So they stay very much focused on the very thing that they want to solve. So unfortunately, if you're focused on a problem, cause and effect, the law of attraction, basically, if you're focused on a problem, that means that's what you're going to have more of coming to you, more of the problem. So literally what you have to learn to do is to not worry. That means you can ask for help and then let it go. Ask for help and let it go with confidence that help is coming. But often that's what people can't do. And that's why people worry, is because they can't just tell themselves, you know what, everything's going to be okay. I know that everything's always okay. These things are always solved. This is going to be fine. And then let it go. No, they almost feel like they're not doing their job if they don't keep their focus on it and keep worrying about it. But the only problem is, the only thing they're doing by doing that is they're having more of the same come back to them. But anyway, like I was saying, so I've explained the ego. So at least you have an idea. Now that is of the lesser self. So when it comes to the three selves, as I said, the lesser self, the higher self, and then the I am presence. And if you were to look at a drawing of this, what you would see is the I am presence would be at the top. The I am presence is your God self. That means God individualized within you. So that in fact is God. I'm not saying there's two gods. That is God. But that's God self-actualized within yourself. So at the top would be your I Am Presence, and then there would be a cord running down, crystal cord, the crystal, or sometimes referred to the crystal river of life. Now, if you are familiar with most of the books of the Bible and a lot of the verses, some of these things are actually in the Bible. Many of the things about the three selves are actually in the Bible. In the Bible actually speaks of the three selves, speaks of the Holy Spirit and the four individual aspects of the Holy Spirit, which, to test my knowledge, to test my memory, is the face of man. Wait a minute. Face of a man, the lamb, the lion, and I can't remember the fourth one. But anyway, so then there's the cord coming down, the crystal river of life, the cord coming down from the I Am Presence into the higher self, going through the heart of the higher self, and then coming on down into your crown chakra. But really, it's not, I don't want to give you the impression that the way the energy flows is crown chakra first, because in fact it's not. It's actually, the crystal cord is actually coming into you. I say through the crown chakra because that's what it would appear to be, but it's actually not coming into the crown chakra. It's actually coming into you through your heart chakra. And in fact, what beats your heart and keeps you living is this exact cord, and the connection that leads up to the I Am Presence is what actually beats the heart and keeps your life sustained. And so the energy travels from your I Am Presence down through, so we're talking when the energy leaves the I Am Presence, it's pure God light. It comes down through the higher self, and then it comes into us, into our heart. That's, for most people, where the problem begins. Because it's at that point that the light either is going to stay pure or it's going to be filtered. And what is it going to be filtered by? It's going to be filtered by worry, by envy, by jealousy, by anger, by all the things that are the issues of your negative ego. So you can see why I say one of the most important things when it comes to attaining enlightenment is self-mastery, having control of the self. Because to have control of the self is to have control over whether or not you are able to bring into yourself and keep it the universal energy, the universal light, pure. And then if you're a healer, that's where the power of your healing comes from. Of course, it's not you healing. You are the conduit. You are the go-between. What kind of conduit are you? Are you a clear vessel? Is what I'm referring to. So these are the three selves, and that's what it would look like if you visualize it. And yes, in fact, you do need to visualize it, as well as other things, but for now, I'll just keep the conversation about the three selves. Now, for example, in the Bible where Jesus said, "You'll only go to the Father through me," that is what he was referring to. Now, think of the way I just described it, and I told you it is with your higher self being the one that's above you, and then above that is the I Am Presence. So, in fact, it is true. To reach the I Am Presence, to reach the Father, you have to go through the Son. But often where people kind of go wrong is they think outside of themselves. Often, if you say the Son, you think Jesus. You don't normally think your own higher self as the Son. You have to be able to think of yourself as a son or daughter, yourself, because that is who we're talking about. We're talking about your own beloved Christ self, again, self-actualized within you. And so it is true that to go to the Father, you have to go through the Son, or go through your own beloved Christ self, your higher self. So often people will ask me, who is the higher self? Why is it that I need to know about the higher self? And I know that it's confusing, and I'll tell you why it's confusing. Often when you have just awakened, and by awakened I mean awakened in any way, shape, or form, whether it was a more spiritual awakening, whether it was a more metaphysical awakening, no matter what type of awakening it was, often what's the first thing we do is we go and we search for answers. And we can only find what's out there. So whatever's out there, that's what you're going to find. Now, what I mean by that is, if the only thing on the internet was witchcraft sites, that's what we'd end up finding, and that's what we'd end up learning. I mean, it's, and that is that has been a problem in the past, is that our development has very much in the past been dictated by the knowledge and information that's out there. So the first thing that you do is you go and you look. And often, we may join a message board so that we can get help from people who have gone through what we're going through and can help us. And what's the first thing that's going to happen? Well, I can tell you. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to be told a few things. You're going to be told to meditate, to learn how to protect yourself, to learn how to ground. And those are going to be the most basic, rudimentary things that you need to learn and that you need to get used to doing every day, all the time. Then, what you're going to be told about is, often what happens is, knowledge about angels and ascended masters and everything is usually shared. And unfortunately, the first thing that is not shared with you is not information on the higher self, is not information on the I am presence. The first thing that comes up will not be God and will not be your beloved Christ self. That's too bad, because often the paths that we take and how we're diverted off the path, and then we have to get back there, and then, you know what I mean, all of that actually could be avoided if knowledge was shared in the way it was really, the way the person really needed it. And so it is unfortunate that one of the most important things, who you truly are, is probably something that may not come up. I mean, I know it sounds kind of funny that's who your true self is. That's who you are. That is your own self. That is you. So you could think of it as your higher self is, if you are not incarnate in a body, that is who you are. So outside of existing in a body, that's your true self. That's who you are. And that sounds kind of important, doesn't it? But that's probably not something that'll be brought up right away, if at all. And like I said, that's too bad, because it is very important. And if you are on a spiritual path and spiritual advancement is important to you, then the knowledge about the higher self, understanding about the higher self, should be thought of as something that is like basic, like the matter, like something that would be learned in kindergarten before going to first grade, second grade, third grade. This is something that is so important that it should be one of the first things, that anyone talks to anyone about. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen. Even with those, I mean, I've read when I go to Blog Talk Radio and I'm listening to other shows, and I like reading their description that talks about who they are and what they do and everything. often they'll talk about their higher self, but I often don't hear it explained and reiterate in a way that really gets across how critically important the higher self is. But I mean, the person knows it from their own spiritual advancement. It's not that they don't know it, but unfortunately, that's not something that's kind of out. That's not knowledge and information and understanding that's out in the forefront. And hopefully soon that will be changing. So the other question that's often asked of me is, so how do you get to know your higher self? You simply get to know your higher self by beginning to communicate with your higher self. And usually what I recommend people to do is talk to themselves. Most people think talking to yourself is bad, like you get talking to yourself, somebody's going to commit you. But actually talking to yourself is good. And you will realize eventually that as you're talking to yourself, you're not really having a two-way conversation with yourself. It just seems like it. It seems like you're talking to yourself and there's a two-way going on. But then one day you realize, well, wait a minute. I'm not really having a two-way conversation, And then you start paying attention and you realize that, in fact, it is your higher self that's interjecting. That as you're talking to yourself, your higher self is actually carrying on that conversation back and forth with you. It is so subtle that most never realize it. Many people don't recognize it because it is so subtle. But the best way to get to know the higher self, to get to know your own true self, is first of all, don't make the mistake of thinking that you're speaking to someone who is outside of yourself. This is about when people talk about going within. When they speak of going within, we're speaking of not just meditating, but we're actually talking about every time you out loud or in your head speak to your higher self, you're going within. If you just say good morning to your higher self, tell your higher self, today I want to work on some things, today I really need to get this up. That little conversation right there, you're communicating with your higher self, which is not outside of yourself. It's actually within yourself. But you actually have to take the time to get used to continually reminding yourself that this is not something that's outside of yourself, but something that's within yourself. Now, that is very important along your spiritual path, the day when you get that on all levels, and you get it and you feel it. You feel how it's within yourself and how it's not something or someone that's outside yourself. That'll be the days that you move forward a little bit more. The same thing with your I Am Presence. If you request anything of your I Am Presence, like for example, one of the things that every day, usually several times a day, I request my I Am Presence to do is to draw down and surround me with the white tube of light. Many people have actually heard of the white tube of light, just not in reference or regards to their I Am Presence or God. And they use this white tube, but they're not using it in a sense where they're visualizing that it's coming down from someone, but actually to request that and to visualize that tube of light is coming down from your I Am Presence, in a wide tube that's, I don't know, probably 8 feet out from you, coming down from your I Am Presence. So coming down, surrounding and including your higher self, and then continuing down and also surrounding you. So it's like you're in this tube that's filled with white light, which is pure universal energy. It's very protective. So I now only for protection, I'm very much into the violet flame. I love the violet flame, but for protection I use just the white tube of light and the violet flame, but the violet flame I can use in so many different ways. I not only within the tube of light surround myself with the violet flame, I also, I'm doing it not just for protection. The main reason that I do that is to help transmute karma. Any misqualified uses of universal energy. I'm laughing because you may be thinking, misqualified use of energy, like what did you do? You have a bad day. Your child gets on your nerves and you start yelling at your child. Okay, you're going to have a bad day. No matter who you are, every now and then, you're going to have a bad day. And guess what? You're allowed. An enlightened person, if you were to ask an enlightened person, well, as an enlightened person, do you still have a bad day? Sure. And what do? You just tell yourself it's okay. Tomorrow will be different. It's that simple. So, I use the violet flame in other ways as well, like surrounding my house in the violet flame. But I do that because both me and my son are empaths, so we tend to connect to people even in our sleep. Of course, we're not doing it. They're connecting to us, but still, it can cause a bad night of sleep. It could cause you to, generally what happens, depending on who is connecting to me, I will start seeing things, visualizing things that just won't allow me to sleep. That what I'm seeing in the energy of it is like disturbing, and so I have to. I always know, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm by a certain way that I feel. By what I'm seeing when I close my eyes, I always know when throughout the night someone has connected to me. So what I do is I use the violet flame, and I sever the connection. Same thing with my son. For those of you who are empaths and also have family, friends, kids that are empaths, and, you've asked me before, what do I do for them? How do I teach them? Well, you don't really. You do for them until they can do for themselves. Same exact thing that I do for adults many times, whether it's a friend of mine or whether it's, somebody that I'm coaching or helping, until they learn how to do the things that they're going to need to help themselves, I do it for them. So if they somehow connect to somebody and they're picking up bad energy and, and they contact me and they're just like, all of a sudden, I started feeling really sick, really nauseous. I don't know what this energy is I'm feeling. What I do is I do for them what maybe they haven't mastered to do for themselves at the time. So I'll sever the connection for them, protect them, and, if need be, fill them back up with energy. I know it sounds strange the way I say it, but literally that is what I do. And I try to do it in a way that doesn't leave them feeling like they're trying to recuperate, but actually, after I'm done, leaves them feeling whole again, leaves them feeling back to normal. And so that's the whole point. If you have people in your life who are empaths or they're highly sensitive and they're not aware of it, and you help them until they can help themselves. And so that is, in fact, what you do. kids up until a certain age are either too young to explain these things to, or even as teenagers, they're simply not interested. I mean, that's not uncommon. I've heard that a lot. I mean, you have to wait until it's that person's time. When it's their time, it'll be their time. In the meantime, you can be the person that will help them out when it's needed. I mean, that is what a friend does. That is what a loved one does for another loved one. You know what I mean? If somebody was going through a hard time, like, you know, they couldn't pay their rent, and they came to you for help, if you could help them, you would. Well, this is the same thing. If you see that a loved one or a friend needs help and you have that mastery, you have that skill, you help them. That's what it's all about. You know, it's about us helping each other, and what you may not be able to do, someone else may be able to do. And that's what it's all about. We don't have to all have it all. We really only have to get together, you know, since, you know, we're all working towards a common goal, and just understand that we are actually a group. We're not separate. We're a group. And if you think about it, in a group, everybody may have a different skill. And you're all putting that together to sustain the group, so the group has what it needs. Well, that's the same thing that I'm talking about. So what the ultimate goal is when it comes to the three selves is to eventually merge the three selves. You will hear a lot of talk, and maybe you will see it on a website talking about the merging of the three selves, but you don't really find a lot of information on how do you do that? How do you merge the three selves? Well, literally, the merging of the three selves come with enlightenment. And I'm not talking about when you first become enlightened, you know, when you first reach those first stages of enlightenment. That merging doesn't happen. That is actually the ultimate goal when you've reached that final stage of enlightenment. Or it will happen right away if you experience a spontaneous enlightenment. Then you would have the merging of the three selves, and you would then not be living a life as your lesser self, but instead you would be living a life as your higher self, as your beloved Christ self. So then you would become Christ. So to say that you are working on merging the three selves is the same as saying that you're working on becoming Christ, or that you're working on attaining enlightenment. There are many different different cultures, different things that mean the same thing, the merging of the three selves. But, for example, what Buddha did was called enlightenment. What Jesus did was called becoming Christ. Same thing, it's just that from different religious backgrounds, different cultures, they're called different things. They're no different, it's just a different label on it. We call it something different. And so that is the ultimate goal, is the merging of the three selves. And I know that you're probably going to take it a step further and say, well, how do you do that? Well, actually, I've already said how you do that. I mean, you work on self-mastery. First of all, you can't get there without self-mastery. You can't get there without self-mastery of all of the chakras. So you have to have self-mastery of every one. So there's many things that you must do and that you must master on the road to enlightenment and the merging of the three selves, including gaining an understanding and thought, action, and deed of the 12 sacred virtues of God, like, for example, God power, God love, God control, God, I can't name them all just off the top of my head, but those are a few. But so there's many things you do along the path, and there's no hurry, there's no rush, so this is not something that you think of hurrying up and trying to achieve. This is something that you simply, in your day-to-day life, you're constantly working on. I mean, if your neighbor rings your doorbell, there's going to be an opportunity for you to work on yourself, because maybe your neighbor is going to say something that then you have to figure out what you're going to say and what you're going to do. And you are going to attempt to behave as your Christ self, or you're going to attempt to behave as your God self. So on a day-to-day basis, that's what you're trying to achieve. Not acting like your lesser self, but you're trying to achieve acting like your own higher self or your God self. Some days you'll do really well, and then other days you won't. And that's okay. And there's nothing to feel guilty about if you have a really bad day, because every day the slate is wiped completely clean. And knowing that, you should never hold any guilt. Guilt will make you ill. Guilt will stop you in, along your spiritual path. I mean, you can be going along fine, and then something huge can happen, and it could cause you to feel guilt. But if you allow yourself to feel guilt, to hold on to that feeling, that'll literally stop you in your tracks. So you have to learn to let go. One of the best ways to practice that is every night, just let yourself go over your day, review it quickly, and then just say, you know what, I kind of see where things went wrong, I kind of see what I did right, what I did wrong, what I would have done differently, and then let it go. Completely let it go and say, okay, well, I get another day. I get tomorrow to try again. And if you think of it that way, that you are always getting to start the day with a clean slate and you're getting to try it again, that is actually the way it is. That is, in fact, the way it works. You always get a clean slate. The only time you don't get a clean slate is when you take it away from your own self. And that's what guilt does. Or not being able to let go of something that happened. Or somebody did something to you and now you're holding on to anger and resentment. By hanging on to it, all you're doing is you're taking your clean slate away from yourself so that you don't get to wake up that next morning with a clean slate. But don't you want a clean slate? Wouldn't you love to start off the day with a clean slate every day? Well, you can. The only thing that's stopping you from doing that is, in fact, your own self. So all of these things and being able to do these things, these are a part of learning, self-mastery and self-control. So this is, like I said, it's, in every day throughout your life, I mean, you're not just working on your spiritual development from this time to this time every day. No, you're working on it all the time. You're always working on it, and you're always, trying to do better every day, trying to be more of your Christ self, and and presenting to people more of your God self every day. For a while, I had this thing that I would constantly say to myself, and it would be, I would say, with dignity and grace. And what I would do is, whenever I wasn't quite sure, how to handle a certain situation, maybe I wasn't sure even what to say, whether to say anything at all, I would say that to myself. I would say, with dignity and grace. The reason why is because I got into this habit of telling myself, you can't go wrong as long as whatever you do it with dignity and grace. You can't go wrong. And for the longest time, I would say that to myself whenever I got to a place where, I just wasn't quite sure what's the right way to handle this. And there will be those situations where you just don't know. You're just not sure. And, it's a great thing to remind yourself of that will help yourself when you kind of feel like, okay, this is tough. I'm not sure what the right way to handle this. Just handle it with dignity and grace, because you're allowed to make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes, and mistakes aren't really mistakes. If it happened, it was supposed to happen. And if it happened, it was supposed to happen, and you were supposed to learn something from it. That's not a mistake. That's literally spiritual education. But anyway, I think I talked long enough. I actually didn't mean to, but I'm glad that I took the time to, I didn't go all that in depth with when it came to the three selves, but I think I went in depth enough so that maybe you'll feel like you have a little bit better understanding of it, so that maybe you'll kind of feel like, okay, well, I may not 100% get it, but I kind of get the concept of it, and I know where to start. I know how to look at it and think about it, and I also know how to visualize my three selves. I know how to start working on, getting to know my own higher self. I know how to just start communicating with my own, just talking. Doesn't matter if you don't hear an answer back, or if you think you don't hear an answer back. Just do it. Ask your higher self for help. Ask your higher self. Say, for example, if you are in communication with somebody and the discussion is getting heated and the person's not happy with you and there's agitation and, it looks like it's quickly getting to the point where it's going to turn into an argument, ask your higher self quietly in your head, ask your higher self to surround both of you with the violet flame. You could do that. If you, for example, if you are at work and maybe you have a project and you've been assigned, to be in a team of people working on it, and maybe you often have a hard time at work when it comes to these type of team projects. Ask your higher self to attune you to the properties of an ant. Yes, I said an ant. Why? What do you think of when you think of ants? You usually don't just see, sometimes, but usually don't just see one by itself. There's usually a lot of them, and they're usually all helping to carry this one big, huge piece of crumb. Even though one is strong enough to do it, often they're like when my dogs, I can't leave my dog's dog food on the floor, because if I leave it sitting on the floor, the ants will come from nowhere, and there'll be thousands of them. So I can never leave her dog food down, so she always has to ask me for it when she wants it. So, the thing is, even after she eats, there can be some crumbs around her dish. Well, the ants, tons of them will come, and working as a team, their goal, you can look at them and tell, their goal is to take away, get as much food and back to their little homes as they can and as quickly as they can. And they work quickly. And they work well together. So, you can ask your higher self to attune you to the properties of an ant. Or maybe for the sight and being able to see the truth, even through an illusion, maybe you want to ask your higher self to attune you to the properties of an owl. So you get where I'm going. You can ask yourself your higher self for help. So if you're thinking of asking me, well, why would I need to get to know my higher self? Why is this important? Just the couple suggestions that I gave you should really have started your gears in your brain to really thinking. You shouldn't have to really ask me why it's so important. Your higher self is you. Your higher self is that true part of yourself, that part of yourself that knows the truth about everything, that has all the knowledge and all the understanding you need. It is, in fact, the second coming. Like, people will always ask me, do you believe in the second coming? Well, of course I believe in it. It already happened. It happened almost right after Jesus said it was going to happen. It happened. And most people have been waiting for it. Well, it's already happened. It's individualized within us all. He even explained, that was one of the lessons that Jesus explained to the apostles and the disciples during the Last Supper and during some other times around that time frame, those last few days. He spent so much time trying to explain that lesson to them. And one of the ways he explained it is he gave an example. He said, wouldn't it be better if instead of only being, living here on earth and in a body, only being able to be in one place at a time, only being able to be at one place at a time, teaching one person or one group of persons at a time? Wouldn't it be much better if I left and I could come back and be with all of you and be with everyone in the whole world? He didn't use that exact terminology. He didn't exactly say it like that. But wouldn't it be better if I could be with all of you, helping all of you, sharing knowledge with all of you, and not just a small select few? Wouldn't it be better if I could do that for everyone? That is, as most people understand it, that is the second coming. But what they didn't understand, he actually explained to the disciples and apostles that he would be a part of all of them. And that part of all of them, what I'm referring to, is your own higher self. And it's funny, if you ask, why is the higher self important? Well, the same person that might ask that may actually also ask, well, do you believe in the second coming, and do you think it's going to happen? Now, kind of ponder that. We're talking about the same thing here. It is your own higher self. It's called the higher self just simply because it is the higher self. It's the higher self in everything, in vibration, in knowledge and understanding. The higher self in everything. But really, the true way to refer to your higher self is your beloved Christ self. That is who the higher self is. So I think that's at least enough for right now to kind of get you started to be able to at least, meditate on what I've shared with you so that you can pull down your own understanding of this from your own higher self in meditation. Or if you're like me, the understanding comes right after you come out of meditation. But that should be enough to get you started. I should have given you, I think, enough of an idea and picture of the concept to be able to meditate on it. Anyway, I really appreciate you listening. I realize that it's been an hour and a half. I apologize for talking so long. I, of course, always enjoy sharing what I have and what I've been given with everyone, and I appreciate all of you. And I hope you have an awesome day, and until next time.